It's my pleasure now to hand over to Shasta, and her presentation is entitled Future Shock or Not.
Right now, there are 10 people living in space and a nuclear-powered robot searching for life on Mars. Also, halfway between the Earth and the Sun, 18 gold-plated beryllium hexagons have unfurled to allow us to gaze into the farthest reaches of the cosmos. Back here on the planet we call home, we have things like underwater robots scanning the seafloor of Antarctica in high definition, drones flying through gigafactories in Berlin, and 14-ton driverless tractors are autonomously ploughing the fields of the American Midwest. The doctors have recently unveiled a new mRNA vaccine. This one is for solid cancer tumours. And for the first time in medical history, a paralysed or fully locked-in person has been able to communicate in complete sentences, and that is thanks to a machine that connects to their mind. So it's not all bad news. Yes, hello everyone. My name is Shasta. I am an invertebrate ecologist. So I spend some of my time identifying and describing new species of insects. That's how I got a species of beetle named after me. And I also investigate how Australia's smallest animals help create ecosystems and how those systems are responding to our changing climate. And because I work with some pretty unappealing subject matter like cockroaches and climate change, I also became a science communicator. And it's through this pathway that I have joined forces with this team, Future Crunch. So what is Future Crunch? People are probably wondering. You'll be pleased to know that it has nothing to do with eating insects. Rather, we are a think tank. We're a group of unlike minds united by a simple mission, which is to understand what is happening out on the cutting edge of science and technology. And we want to know that so that we can help individuals and organizations understand what is coming next by seeking out and sharing remarkable stories of human endeavour and achievement. Because as you say, there is always two sides to any story. If we take the pandemic, for example, it felt like 3 years of stumbling through a real-life zombie movie. It was complete with angry mobs and daily body counts. And just when we made it through that, we arrived into a global polycrisis. Inflation through the roof and supply chain disruption, an energy crisis in a year of biblical fires and then rains and then floods, a once-in-a-generation disruption in the way that we work, and now something called ChatGPT is helping all of our children cheat on their homework. It's overwhelming. And yet, despite the challenges, there have also been some incredible recent triumphs. We just don't hear about it as much because bad news is happening fast and good news is more often happening slowly. But if we want to change the story of the human race in the 21st century, we need to start changing the stories that we tell ourselves, the ones that we seek out and listen to and share. And if you can tear yourself away from the standard news headlines, you will find some of these positive signals amongst the negative noise. And those will also be deeper, far more underlying drivers of change than the kinds of things you would have been hearing about on the nightly news anyhow. Let's start by looking again at the pandemic. Because our zombie apocalypse was complete with a remarkable team of medical avengers who invented a miracle cure right in front of our eyes. Now, it's easy to forget but an entirely new type of medical technology saved the lives of nearly 20 million people just in the last 2 years. Now that more than 3/4 of the human population have received their mRNA vaccine, means that we've all been part of the largest, fastest, and most successful public health campaign of all time. Meanwhile, clean energy transition has gone into overdrive in Australia. The final quarter of last year, green energy overtook coal for the first time in the history of the grid. That means that globally, the war in the Ukraine has actually done more to advance the clean energy transition than any other event to date. Countries woke up to realise that war can stop the oil from flowing, but it can't stop the sun from shining or the wind from blowing. And that means that out there on the streets, things are getting fast and furious. Sales of electric cars in Australia doubled in 2022. Worldwide, there is 10 million new electric vehicles sold last year. So that means that there's now 3 times as many electric vehicles on the road as there were when the first COVID vaccines were first released. Having an electric vehicle and charging an electric vehicle is getting even easier. This is a pop-up charging station, comes up out of the ground, and it's just around the corner from our Melbourne office. Or these are all of the charging stations that are available to any one of us Tasmanians right now. There's one at Strathgordon. Like, that's the literal end of the road. In fact, each week brings some fresh new technological wonder. This is a giant battery that is housed under a mountain in Switzerland, and it's capable of storing the equivalent of 400,000 of those electric vehicles. On the mountain tops in Switzerland, they have now started using high-powered laser beams to intercept lightning strikes from a much greater height, and that means a much greater width than has ever been possible before. That means that this is the first evolution in lightning rod technology since 1752. Now, we've recently reached an extraordinary milestone in one of our quests for the holy grail of energy, fusion. You know, the stuff that powers the sun. In November last year, for the first time ever, physicists managed to create a reaction that made more energy than they had put into it. In China, we've created quantum satellites. That means that this is capable of teleporting information instantaneously over distances of greater than 1,000 kilometres. Restaurants from Singapore to Tel Aviv are serving up this 3D printed lab-grown Wagyu steak. Consumers say that it is indistinguishable from the real thing, and that means that, yes, I can report live and right now that cows everywhere are utterly over the moon. And you might eat some kind of steak like this in a restaurant like this. This is a robot cafe in Tokyo, but rather these robots are avatars. They are remotely controlled via the internet by people who can't otherwise leave their homes. In New York, a small Aussie startup has become the first in the world to implant a device into somebody's brain via their jugular, allowing them to communicate with devices. This is true brain-machine interfacing. And in the world of cancer research, a teenage girl has had her incurable cancer cleared from her body in the first ever application of a revolutionary new type of genetic therapy called base editing, or otherwise known as CRISPR 2.0. Finally, I'll introduce you to the Samson Switchblade. This is a street-legal, 3-wheeled car that at the touch of a button converts into a fully functional aeroplane. Like, this is childhood Lego dreams manifest, right? Who doesn't want to be a Top Gun? I think that my call sign would be, the Flying Doctor. Now, even though all of this is good news, might still feel overwhelming. The world can, at times, good or bad, seem a little bit crazy. And that's kind of because it is. So the next thing I want to give you is a tool. It's a lens for understanding why things are changing so quickly and why that makes us feel so uncomfortable. So you see that we have these evolutionary hangovers, these cognitive biases, and they leave us ill-equipped to understand and deal with the progress, particularly of technology. And of course, that is affecting everything in the world around us now, because our brains think in a linear function. Therefore, we take changes that are happening around us and we extrapolate them linearly into the future. But technology doesn't change linearly, it expands exponentially. This means that when we're trying to predict where things are going, what the future might hold, we're left with this perception gap. In the short term, we dramatically overestimate where technology is going to take us. That's why we're all wondering, where is my hoverboard? And then in the long term, we dramatically underestimate what technology is actually going to turn into and how it's going to impact our lives. Now, that phenomenon is called Amara's Law, and it is affecting everything from supply chains to blockchains and from medicine to mobile phones. Now, we pour some fuel on that fire in the form of the global pandemic. And what we get is unprecedented upheaval in literally every industry all at once. I mean, you were all there. It's financial services, manufacturing, logistics, legal, energy, retail, even my sector, education. None of these things are ever going to look the same, because we've seen years of change crunched down into months. And as a scientist, I actually find it kind of delightfully ironic that the thing that forced us all to go digital wasn't any of those exponentially expanding technologies. It wasn't the 5G or the blockchain or the metaverse. It came from biology. It was that tiny little bundle of proteins. It's 10,000 times smaller than a grain of salt. And technologically, we had the equipment we needed to go remote for years. The reason that we didn't is because mammalian habits are incredibly difficult to change. But that's just a testimony to the force of the push that we all received. And so we're now living in the present moment that used to be an unimaginable future. But that does also mean that this is a remarkable time of opportunity, precisely because everything has been busted wide open. That means that all of our clients and our customers and our co-workers, everyone in our network, is far more amenable to change, because we were all forced to realize that the way we had been working could have been a lot more flexible than it had been. So now is also an ideal time to be asking ourselves some important questions. What sort of talents do we need to nurture for this new future? And what sort of talents are no longer fit for this new future? Because if we're going to be successful, if we're going to continue to be successful, it's important to be prepared not just for the known unknowns, but for the unknown unknowns as well. And for some inspiration, we look into a field where people are constantly having to answer the question, how to prepare for the unexpected. Those world-renowned flexible thinkers, the US Navy. And so they looked around their operating environment and they realized that the world had changed again. Military technology was evolving, the geopolitical center of the world was shifting east, and they were facing a completely different set of challenges and threats and opportunities compared to just a generation ago. The single most dangerous thing that they could do, however, was nothing. Maintain the status quo. What they did do was create a new kind of ship. This is the USS Gabrielle Giffords. And it's remarkable because it's modular. That means that its insides can be swapped out, allowing it to set sail as a minesweeper or a submarine hunter or a surface combatant. And yet the most futuristic aspect by far is the crew. There's only 40 sailors on board. That's less than a fifth of the number on older ships of the same size. This is a concept known as minimal manning, and it overturns hundreds of years of tradition. And that means that a sailor on any given day might find themselves doing a traditional job like hauling lines on the deck, and then an untraditional job like cooking for their crewmates and serving up food in the mess. Later that same day, that same sailor might find themselves on the deck learning to navigate. Because just like the ship itself, these sailors are no longer specialists, they're becoming modular. Jacks and Jills of many trades, no longer masters of just one. And not everyone can handle this kind of rapid task switching. And so the Navy itself is changing their recruiting processes. They're now looking for and focusing on people who can operate well in these fluid environments, people who can flexibly shift. Because having the right people in the military can be a matter of life or death. And increasingly, the right person is somebody who can do many things quite well, rather than one thing with military precision. And now it's this flexibility, it's this skill that humans have to adapt to the unexpected, which is becoming one of the most crucial talents in any organization all around the world. And the good news that I am here tonight to share with you is that we humans have this extraordinary ability to adapt built in. Adaptability is intrinsic to us. We are wired for this. And I can give you some proof. In fact, you probably brought at least one of these with you tonight. It's one of the most remarkable examples of engineering. So I'd like you to take it out so that we can appreciate them together for a moment. It might be on the table in front of you, it might be in your lap, it might be in your pocket, but I'd like you to take out your hands. And take them in. It's 27 bones, making 29 joints, and of course our big, beautiful, opposable thumbs. On one hand, you have all the potential strength of a rock climber who can hang their entire body weight from one finger. And then, on the other hand, all of the potential programming skill of an origami grandmaster. And these same tools can be used to make the most delicate of creations. They really are one of the most remarkable examples of engineering in nature. They're complex tools that have been evolved and adapted over millions of years. What really sets our hands apart, though, is what drives them, and that is our brain. Because our hands and our brains have evolved together over such a long period of time, that gives us something that is significantly better than artificial intelligence. It's evolutionary intelligence. You see, our machinery isn't fully pre-programmed. Rather, it is reshaping itself constantly as it interacts with our infinitely complex world. And that means that you're a different person than you were this time last year, or at the start of this week, or even at the start of today, because the gargantuan tapestry of your brain has woven itself into something entirely new. And in fact, our brain's remodeling ability is this really beautiful, lifelong gift. It's what allowed each of us to learn as we grew, overcome our weaknesses and compensate. And in fact, it's what allowed humans as a species to survive and thrive everywhere from the African savanna to Antarctica and from the outback into outer space. It's our evolutionary intelligence that allows us to think outside of the box and then outside of the sphere and outside of the stratosphere. So clearly over at Future Crunch, we think people are pretty neat. But on the other hand, the things that people are building, creating, our machines, well, those are becoming incredible. This is an algorithm that can scan through 1 million transactions in a minute. And then, of course, there's the new kid on the block, ChatGPT. Everyone is talking about generative AI. Now, these are based on a technology which is actually called a larger language model. And it's that which scrapes the contents of the internet. And every new word that it learns, that's called a parameter. And it can then use these parameters to find associations between other words or between concepts or images. And so in just a few seconds, a novice like myself can use generative AI to create illustrations or overcome writer's block, or even to generate computer code and do any one of those things at a quality typically attributed to an expert in a specific field. Basically, I'm trying to point out that there is a reason for literally any person to be engaged with this technology. We should be paying attention. It has been the largest technological uptake in human history. It reached 100 million users in just 3 months. And so preparing for this presentation, I wanted to find an example that would really resonate with the Royal Society of Tasmania. And I thought, well, every organisation needs a mission statement, right? So I asked ChatGPT to write you one. I said, hey, ChatGPT, can you write a mission statement for the Royal Society of Tasmania? Well, of course it can. The Royal Society of Tasmania is dedicated to the advancement of knowledge. It's very difficult to read from this angle. In the fields of science, art and humanities. It's beautiful. It's a little long, so I asked ChatGPT if it could write me a slightly shorter one so that we could get through this together. The Royal Society of Tasmania advances knowledge in science, arts and humanities, focusing on Tasmanian heritage. We inspire curiosity, foster collaboration. Thank you. Do you feel seen? We sound pretty good when it's written up like this.
Yeah, it's true.
And in fact, that was written using the original ChatGPT 3. GPT-4 has recently been launched, and effectively it makes the original one look like a toy. GPT-3 had 175 billion parameters and GPT-4 has 100 trillion. And that means that we're already seeing it achieve some absolutely remarkable feats. It can already ace the uniform bar exam. It could instantaneously calculate somebody's tax liability. It can actually provide detailed descriptions of images as well. Now, if you are feeling worried about AI, and I would never say that we shouldn't be, but if you are worried about it, then your evolved response is going to be to ignore it. And we already know that that is the worst possible thing that we could do. So Future Crunch has helped even myself reframe these technologies from a dystopian machine that's going to take all of our jobs and make all of our kids stupid, because in reality, for most of us, it's probably not going to do that. It's a tool. It was made by humans and it's for humans. It's designed to work with us and to help us. It's a mirror. It will reflect back to us our human nature. And so if we are diligent and detailed, it might reflect back to us the best parts of our human nature. It is a way to complete a variety of tasks more efficiently, save a little bit of time, improve our accuracy, make our lives a little bit easier, and expand our existing capabilities in exactly the same way that the abacus and the calculator and the computer that came before them also did for us. And so we think about it more in terms of, instead of artificial intelligence, it's intelligent augmentation. This is a tool. It's for us. Put yourself back in the driver's seat. And for example, you can use generative AI. You can actually give it text prompts and it will create art for you, which is wonderful for the talentless amongst us in the room. For example, these AI portraits were created and designed to combat ageism and to commemorate those who have so many of their own stories to tell. The AI artist, Jonas Peterson, created these, and his idea behind the series was to use fashion, which cuts through age and showcases people's personalities, their attitudes, and definitely their inner rebels. You can use generative AI to program your robots to make them do this. Who doesn't want a four-legged robot that can do the four-footed foxtrot? Instead of taking our jobs, a bit more worried about them taking my girl. Always at the climax. We need 5 minutes more music there. We have created machines that can solve a whole host of age-old human problems. I find the results of this one a little bit uncanny. And of course, we've also created machines that can solve those same problems, not the way that we would do it, but at superhuman speeds.
Solving in 3, 2, 1.
That is the current world record. Regardless of all of these remarkable capabilities, these machines are specialized and they can only do their one thing with military precision. These robots are never going to use their robot arm to write a love letter to your spouse, or use their robot arm to create a bang-up scratch meal with what is left in the bottom of the lockdown larder. And this robotics researchers have a name for it. It's called Moravec's paradox. It's the observation that machines and humans have opposite strengths and weaknesses. Now that can sound pretty self-evident, but it was very recently that we genuinely believed that logic and reason was what made us very special as humans and set us apart. Now, of course, it is the easiest thing for machines to do. They put us to shame. And so if you want to know where humans really shine, it's actually where the rules get broken. It's where we have to make conceptual leaps, link together two previously unrelated concepts. It's at the core of both creativity and innovation. It's taking the new and making it familiar, or taking the familiar and recasting it into a whole new light. And where we see that, that's where we see progress. So, speaking of breaking the rules, hands up who's ever followed one of these. Paths that break away from the pavement are actually called desire lines. Isn't that beautiful? And they're evidence of our intuition about the shortest route from A to B, because basically biological life is incredibly energy efficient. Now, desire lines can crop up anywhere from a corner of your local park to these ones carved across the lawns of the Brazilian National Congress, and they're so well established that they're actually visible via satellite. Now, desire lines present important information about human movement because the consequences of ignoring them is costly, wasted design, wasted infrastructure, and damaged landscaping. So some designers have actually opted to read the writing on the wall, if you will, and when installing new buildings, instead of putting in pathways like they did here at the Michigan State University, they didn't pave pathways. They waited for student foot traffic to carve out the most commonly used routes, and then they just paved those. And this is an idea that is actually as old as human movement. It's believed that Broadway in New York is paved over the footpath of the Native American Wixwawick Way. And in fact, the intuition for energy-efficient travel even predates multicellular life. This is a slime mold. It's a giant single-celled organism which will grow and explore its environment looking for food. And in this way, they can actually be employed to find the shortest route through a maze. And if you think that this looks more like a subway network than a maze, you're correct. Researchers in Japan arranged oats to replicate the subway stations surrounding Tokyo, where talented and dedicated engineers had spent countless hours designing Japan's rail system to be one of the most efficient in the world. A foraging slime mold took only days to recreate an almost identical network of routes between resources. And because this is an organism, it's constantly adapting and adjusting for maximum efficiency, you can actually use it to do emergency contingency mapping. You simply block off one path to one pile of oats and you have an actively evolving flood or landslide map. Why break the mold when you can collaborate with it? Now, there are some things that are only achievable with the wonders of technology. Are there any lawyers in the room? This is Slaughter and May. It is one of the most prestigious law firms in the world. It's part of the Magic Circle, which are the 5 most successful and large law firms in London. And this one is largely considered to be the oldest and stuffiest of the lot. It basically doesn't become less flexible or less adaptable than an institution like this. Although that was up until recently. A couple of years ago, they started collaborating with a small tech startup called Luminance that provided them with some AI technology, some artificial intelligence that's designed to read documents and analyze them prior to large mergers and acquisitions. And so this tool was immediately able to identify things like key clauses, data points, even anomalies. And it saved their real human staff hundreds of hours of combing through near identical documents. And they actually saw the paperwork get done with better accuracy and in about half the time. That is remarkable. But it is also what this tool was designed to do. What was more remarkable, some of the unexpected benefits. For instance, the firm became more attractive to the best and brightest legal graduates coming from university. They were keen to use the latest technology. And then another unforeseen advantage, all the time that they were saving on all of this copy proofing, they were actually able to spend more time on more satisfying work, the stuff that they had studied so long to do, things like giving advice and doing analysis. In other words, AI didn't replace the jobs of young lawyers. It basically made them better to do than they were previously. Now, our final example is here to show us what we can achieve when we put together human ingenuity and technological advancements. This is Alexandra Narvaez and Alex Luchitante, and they are 2 young members of the Cofan tribe of Amazonian Ecuador. Now, for centuries, the Amazon has provided food, it's been supermarket, home, even pharmacy to these people. However, since the discovery of oil and gold about a century ago, the tribe's territory has constantly been under threat from mining companies. And this is without any protection, basically, from the Ecuadorian government. So in 2017, they set up a land patrol designed to spot and report illegal activity that's taken place in their territory. People had been doing this. Traditional people in their traditional lands have been doing things like this for decades. They're basically up against impossible odds, as Indigenous tribes have been attempting to protect their lands against these problems without achieving any real change. While on patrol, they discovered 20 large-scale mining concessions that had been issued without any government approval. So they realized that to get different results, they were also going to have to do things differently. So they combined their ancestral knowledge with some modern tools. We're talking about like motion-activated cameras hidden along forest trails and flying drones to patrol their rivers and streams. This was allowing them to document this illegal activity, and all just provided with cheap consumer goods purchased online. You realize this means they actually protected the Amazon by making purchases on Amazon. And the images and the video footage that they were able to capture allowed them to rally international support through social media. They were able to crowdsource the funding that they needed. And then with all of this alternative support, they were eventually able to take the mining companies to court. In 2018, they have managed to get 52 mining concessions cancelled, ensuring the protection of an extra 80,000 acres of rainforest. And it's thanks to these victories that more women have joined the Land Patrol, and these people are actually expanding their mission to now help other Indigenous communities around the world preserve their ancestral lands and cultures as well. So we're going to take a quick moment of reflection. What is that one thing that all of these stories have in common? What is that key factor that US Navy sailors and engineers in Japan share with the lawyers at Slaughter and May and our conservationists in Ecuador? Well, it wasn't their qualifications, their IQ, their intelligence quotient. If you know someone in your life who is incredibly intelligent, you might also know that sometimes they lack the empathy necessary for good problem solving because you have to understand other people's problems. But the key to these stories isn't their EQ, their emotional intelligence either. Rather, the thing I'm here to introduce you to tonight is a concept, is a characterization known as AQ. This is your adaptability quotient. AQ is the ability to work out what is relevant, to unlearn obsolete knowledge, and allows people to overcome challenges by making a conscious effort to change in real time. Now, all of those three quotients are complementary. If you take the example of applying for a job, for example, it's your IQ that puts your resume at the top of the pile. It lands you the interview, but it's your EQ that allows you to really hit it off with the interviewer. That's what lands you the job, and of course allows you to quickly make these great working relationships with your customers or your clients. But it's AQ that allows you to pivot when an algorithm comes along, and it takes 30% of your previously assigned tasks. What do you do with that spare capacity? Well, it's the winners are those whose AQ allows them to pick up something that the machines can't yet take off of their hands. That's why the Harvard Business Review calls it the next competitive advantage. But if you're thinking far enough ahead, you might also be asking yourself, if the bougie Harvard Business Review calls this the next competitive advantage, why is the workplace the one place where mental flexibility seems to be so completely absent? Well, you probably do know. If we picture it together, you begin your career with an open mind. You're prepared to make some mistakes and to receive some guidance because you're learning by experimentation. There's a lot of pathways to choose. Somewhere in the middle of that learning, you've been honing and perfecting and streamlining. And so you turn a corner one day and you're like, wow, I'm getting really good at this. And you can see testimonials like saving time, being more efficient. But if left unchecked, that sense of satisfaction might actually lead you astray. If you hear yourself down the road one day saying this terrible phrase, that's the way we've always done things here. Now you know that you're lost in the weeds, because if you keep doing things the one right way over and over and over again, you're going to carve a rut and you're going to get stuck in it. In fact, there's a paradox here. The more that you know about a subject, the more likely you are to close off your mind to further learning. As the Zen monk Shunryu Suzuki puts it, in the beginner's eyes, there are many possibilities. In the experts, there are just a few. And so my first piece of takeaway advice as we come to the end of the presentation here for improving your personal adaptability quotient, for honing your AQ, is to adopt the mindset of the amateur. Now, we all probably think that the word amateur is a bit of an insult, but it's actually derived from the Latin word for a person who adores an endeavour. Amateurs aren't doing things because it's part of a professional development package. They're doing it because they feel compelled, and so they dive in boots first and they experiment and they muck things up and they find out. And so the amateur approach is firstly going to prove all of the important rules the one time that they get broken. But the amateur mindset is also an ideal way of disproving all of the unimportant rules, things that have become dried up old stale traditions. Rules like skateboarding isn't for girls, or you can't learn to skateboard at the age of 57. Adaptability is all about viewing things through fresh eyes, unlearning obsolete knowledge. And that means that you're seeing past the assigned and into the possible. So you can see that adaptability isn't about your experience or your age or even your creativity. It's an attitude. And just like physical fitness, a mindset is something that can be exercised. You can work at it and train for it, and you will actually get better at this process. Now, our second suggestion of how to adapt and hone your own adaptability quotient is called strong opinions, but lightly held. If we're honest with ourselves, we probably all struggle to let go of our really brilliant ideas. In fact, having them challenged can feel so personal that it is uncomfortable. If you're anything like me, then the feeling of being wrong isn't one that you enjoy. But of course, the reality is that literally all of us are going to get it wrong at some point in time. The thing that we should be far more concerned about is that being wrong without realizing it feels exactly like being right. And that's an impossible high horse to climb down off of. Now, adaptable people get around this by acknowledging that there is always a chance that they might be wrong. And that means that when contrary evidence or a better way of doing things comes along, they are poised to so much more elegantly change their mind and adapt and be flexible. And I consider myself quite lucky because that's basically the way that we do things in science. In science, changing your mind is actually part of the method, because the scientific method is a way of thinking that wasn't actually just designed to allow for correction. It's actually constantly evolving. Given just one new piece of contrary evidence, science insists that we relearn and rethink everything that we thought we knew. And that's explicitly why it is awesome, because it changes. And it's those changes as they accrue that are actually changing our world right along with them. And so we ask you to ask yourselves, can you think like a scientist? Can you hold those strong ideas a little more lightly and be open to correction? What's really powerful about this mindset at an organizational level is that when you show your team, the people around you, that your opinion has room to evolve, you're actually giving others a safe and respectful place to share their ideas and change their minds too. Now, I understand that the homework that I've just assigned you is a little bit challenging, grappling with a daunting task, no less than tearing down some of the reliable walls that you've built in your mind over your lifetimes. And so the final piece of good news I have to share with you is that when you're planning on changing your mind, you don't have to do any of this alone. You can actually outsource your adaptable thinking. It's the way that Future Crunch does things, which is by collaboration. I said at the beginning that we call ourselves a group of unlike minds, that we are different by design. Simply put, we're hoping to capture all of the problem-solving potential of our engineers as well as our ecologists, and to have the breadth and depth of understanding that comes from our artists and from our economists. We have a political economist, but we put him to good use, I promise. And now in each of your communities, you are also surrounded by disruptive thinkers. Although I don't know about you, some of them do look a little more disruptive than others. The one thing that is certain, though, is that any person who knows less about your specialty will also be completely free from your preconceived ideas. They don't know anything about the way we just do things here. And the more access that you have to different perspectives in your community means the less that you have to keep crammed inside your own head. If we take another example, if you ask an engineer to tear down a wall, their answer is going to look a certain way. But if you ask an artist to tear down the same wall, their solution is going to look completely different. And finally, if you're part of a team full of people with diverse experiences from their diverse backgrounds, diverse ways of thinking because of their age or their gender or their beliefs, if you've taken this team of curious and innovative minds and then you empower them to make mistakes, give them agency to make suggestions, then you'll have all of the problem-solving potential of their strengths at your fingertips all of the time. And this is how we know that collaboration will always trump genius. Because to face the future confidently, adapt in real time, for those kinds of things we need each other. Because life happens. All of its ups and downs, and through it all, we do what we do best, which is adapt. This whole time, we've been gaining survival skills, we've been expanding our horizons and harnessing the strength to overcome some of life's biggest challenges, like finding the empathy to put ourselves in the shoes of a stranger. Now, we acknowledge just how lucky we are to be here, to have the chance to experience life in all of its nuances. That means its beauty and its sadness. Because none of us knows what's coming next, but what we do know is that you were born with the innate ability to face it. In fact, perhaps even to transform it into something of benefit to the people around you, maybe even the whole planet. This has been an opportunity to grow yourself, maybe just by learning to love the science and the magic of change. And there are so many ways to get started. It's kind of exciting because it sort of doesn't matter where you begin. Are you cultivating the amateur mindset or the scientific mindset and holding your strong opinions a little more lightly? Realizing that they can evolve from within or with some collaborative help from the people around you from without. Either way, I just encourage you to remember that you are remarkable. You're built for this, and so you will never be too old or too young to set out on an adventure and try that one new thing. Thank you all so very much.